My wife divorced me because I was a school janitor. 2 years later, she ended up working for my company. Before we begin today's story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell if you enjoy powerful stories about resilience, redemption, and unexpected second chances. Your support means everything to us, and it helps us continue bringing you emotional, unforgettable stories like this one. We'd also love to know where you're watching from. So leave your city or country in the comments below and join viewers from around the world who are part of this amazing community. Thank you for being here. And now, let's step into today's story and meet the man whose life changed in a way no one could have imagined. The world rarely notices the person holding the mop until one day that same person is holding the keys. At exactly 6:15 every morning, before the first school bus rolled into the parking lot, and before the hallways filled with voices, Malcolm Brooks unlocked the side entrance of Jefferson Heights Middle School with the same worn brass key he had carried for nearly 7 years. The building greeted him with familiar sounds that no one else ever seemed to notice. The steady hum of fluorescent lights warming to life. The soft click of the heating system pushing cool autumn air through the vents. The faint squeak of his work shoes against polished tile floors that reflected the glow of the ceiling lights like quiet rivers stretching through empty hallways. Malcolm pushed his cleaning cart forward with practiced hands, stopping first outside the main office. He emptied the trash bins, straightened a crooked welcome mat, and smiled politely as the security guard nodded in greeting. Few people ever remembered his name. Most simply called him the janitor. He never corrected them. By 7 o'clock, teachers began arriving with travel mugs filled with fresh coffee, juggling lesson plans and backpacks. Some offered quick smiles. Others hurried past without looking up from their phones. Malcolm never took it personally. Every classroom he cleaned, every hallway he polished, every cafeteria table he wiped down would soon be filled with children chasing dreams that seemed much larger than his own. He believed there was dignity in making sure they walked into a clean, safe place each morning. But not everyone shared that belief. Standing outside the front entrance, dressed in a tailored cream-colored business suit that looked untouched by the morning breeze, Vanessa Brooks checked her watch with growing impatience. She had once admired Malcolm's kindness, his patience, and the quiet confidence that never demanded attention. Those qualities had mattered when they were both younger, when late-night conversations and inexpensive dinners had felt like enough. Somewhere along the way, dreams had changed shape. Hers had become taller office buildings, executive meetings, luxury apartments overlooking the city skyline, and social circles where introductions always included impressive job titles. Malcolm's life, at least from her perspective, had remained frozen beneath fluorescent lights and the scent of floor cleaner. When Malcolm stepped outside carrying a fresh bag of recycling, he immediately noticed the envelope in Vanessa's hand. It was crisp, perfectly flat, untouched by the wind. She didn't smile. She didn't ask how his day had been. She simply extended the envelope toward him with calm precision. "I can't keep pretending this life fits me," she said quietly. There was no anger in her voice anymore, only certainty. Malcolm looked down at the papers without opening them. The words on the first page were large enough to recognize before reading another line. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Around them, parents parked their SUVs, students laughed with friends, and teachers hurried toward the entrance carrying stacks of papers. Life continued exactly as it always had, as if nothing extraordinary were happening on the sidewalk beside the flagpole. Malcolm finally raised his eyes to meet hers. "Is this really what you want?" he asked softly. Vanessa exhaled, almost relieved that the conversation had reached its inevitable destination. "I want a future that keeps moving forward. I don't want to spend the rest of my life explaining why my husband cleans classrooms." The sentence landed. Harder than she intended, yet she didn't take it back. Malcolm lowered his gaze again, his fingers resting lightly against the edge of the envelope while the morning sun cast long shadows across the pavement between them. He searched for an argument, a promise, some sentence capable of changing the direction of the day. None came. Instead, the school bell rang, echoing across the campus as children hurried through doors he had unlocked only hours before. Vanessa turned without another word and walked toward the parking lot, her heels clicking steadily against the concrete until the sound disappeared beneath the growing noise of another ordinary school morning. Malcolm remained exactly where he stood, the divorce papers resting in one hand and the handle of his cleaning card in the other. Then, after one slow breath, he folded the papers carefully, placed them inside his jacket, gripped the mop once more, and quietly walked back inside the building, unaware that the world had just underestimated him for the very last time. The divorce papers remained folded inside the inside pocket of Malcolm Brooks's jacket for weeks, not because he could not bear to look at them again, but because there was nothing left to argue with. Every signature had already been placed exactly where it belonged. Every conversation that might have saved the marriage had happened months before either of them admitted it aloud. Life settled into a quieter rhythm, one measured not by hope, but by discipline. Malcolm continued arriving before sunrise every weekday, unlocking the school while the sky still carried shades of deep blue over the rooftops. He swept classrooms, replaced burned-out light bulbs, repaired loose desk legs, and greeted every student with the same warm smile that never hinted at the weight he carried home each evening. Children still waved when they passed him in the hallway. Some thanked him for finding a lost backpack or fixing a locker door that refused to close. Their kindness reminded him that respect was not always connected to a paycheck. Still, once the final bell rang and the last school bus disappeared beyond the parking lot, silence returned with unusual force. Malcolm drove 15 miles to a modest one-bedroom apartment on the east side of the city, where the furniture was simple, the walls were mostly bare, and the kitchen table had become something entirely different from the place where meals were served. Every night after heating a frozen dinner or making a sandwich, he cleared the table, opened a weathered laptop he had purchased secondhand, and surrounded himself with borrowed books from the public library. Finance, business strategy, leadership, accounting, entrepreneurship. The subjects were intimidating at first, filled with unfamiliar terms and complicated ideas. But Malcolm treated each chapter the same way he treated a broken floor tile at school. He worked on it patiently until it made sense. Some nights, he fell asleep with reading glasses still resting on his face and handwritten notes scattered across the table. Other nights, he remained awake until nearly 2 in the morning, watching free online lectures while rain tapped softly against the apartment window. No one applauded those quiet victories. No one knew they existed. His coworkers believed he spent his evenings watching television. His neighbors assumed he lived an ordinary life. Even Vanessa, whose social media occasionally appeared as a suggested profile before Malcolm quietly dismissed it, seemed convinced that his story had stopped the day she walked away. She posted photographs from rooftop restaurants, networking events, and elegant office parties where everyone smiled beneath sparkling city lights. Malcolm never left comments. He never wished her failure or success. He simply closed the browser and returned to another page of financial statements or another lesson about building sustainable companies. One chilly Friday afternoon, while replacing ceiling tiles inside the school library after a leaking pipe had finally been repaired, Malcolm noticed an elderly man struggling to lift several heavy storage boxes from the back of a rental van. Without hesitation, he climbed down his ladder and crossed the parking lot. The man thanked him with a tired smile, explaining that the boxes contained donated books for a literacy program. Together they carried every box inside, making several trips without complaint. The older gentleman paused before leaving and studied Malcolm with quiet curiosity. He noticed the calluses on Malcolm's hands, the careful way he handled every carton, and the notebook sticking halfway out of his jacket pocket, its pages filled not with shopping lists but with handwritten business calculations. The stranger smiled again, this time a little differently, as though he had noticed something almost everyone else had overlooked, and before driving away, he handed Malcolm a simple business card without saying another word. Malcolm slipped it into his wallet beside an old family photograph, never imagining that the small piece of cardstock would become the first door leading toward a future no one had believed he could build. The business card remained untouched in Malcolm Brooks's wallet for nearly 3 days. He looked at it more than once during his lunch break, studying the elegant lettering without convincing himself to make the call. It carried only a name, Harrison Whitmore, followed by the words Whitmore Educational Foundation and a downtown office address. There was no handwritten message, no promise of opportunity, and no explanation for why a man like Harrison had offered his card to a school janitor after carrying a few boxes of donated books. Malcolm almost dismissed it as nothing more than a polite gesture, but something about the older man's expression lingered in his memory. It had not been sympathy. It had been curiosity. Early Monday evening, after another full day of cleaning classrooms and repairing a broken drinking fountain outside the gymnasium, Malcolm finally gathered enough courage to dial the number. A calm receptionist answered and, to his surprise, transferred the call immediately. Harrison recognized Malcolm's voice before he even introduced himself. The older man invited him to meet the following Saturday morning at a quiet coffee shop overlooking the river. Malcolm arrived 20 minutes early wearing the only navy blazer he owned, one that had been hanging untouched in his closet since a family wedding years before. He felt slightly out of place among professionals carrying leather briefcases and expensive laptops, yet he reminded himself that respect began with showing up. Harrison entered without ceremony, carrying 2 cups of coffee and greeting Malcolm like an old friend rather than someone he had met only once. They spoke for nearly 2 hours. Harrison asked very little about Malcolm's divorce or personal disappointments. Instead, he asked about ideas. He wanted to know why a school janitor filled notebooks with business calculations. Malcolm hesitated at first, embarrassed that his dreams might sound unrealistic. But Harrison listened without interrupting as Malcolm described an affordable facilities management company built around efficiency, technology, and genuine respect for workers who were often invisible. Malcolm explained how schools, hospitals, and office buildings lost thousands of dollars each year because maintenance systems remained outdated. He had spent years quietly observing problems that executives never noticed because they never walked the hallways before sunrise. Every answer came from experience rather than theory. Harrison leaned back with a thoughtful smile. He had spent decades investing in entrepreneurs, and he recognized something that could not be taught inside any business school. Malcolm understood people because he had spent years serving them without expecting recognition. Before they left, Harrison handed Malcolm a leather notebook. Inside the front cover, he had written a single sentence in careful handwriting. Never confuse where you begin with where you belong. Malcolm ran his fingers gently across the ink before closing the notebook. Harrison then invited him to attend a monthly gathering where local entrepreneurs presented new business ideas to experienced investors. Malcolm almost laughed at the thought of standing before successful executives while wearing clothes purchased from a department store clearance rack, but Harrison simply smiled and said that confidence was measured by preparation, not price tags. As Malcolm stepped back onto the sidewalk, the afternoon sunlight reflected across the river while a cool breeze carried the scent of fresh rain through the city streets. For the first time since the day Vanessa had walked away, the future no longer looked like a hallway that ended at a locked door. It looked like a road stretching farther than he had ever allowed himself to imagine. And although he still carried a janitor's key ring in his pocket, he had quietly begun unlocking an entirely different life. The months that followed became a season that almost no one witnessed because the greatest transformations rarely happen beneath bright lights. Malcolm Brooks continued reporting to Jefferson Heights Middle School every weekday before dawn, his key ring still jingling softly as he unlocked the familiar entrance, yet his evenings belonged to an entirely different future. After attending Harrison Whitmore's first entrepreneur gathering, Malcolm discovered that brilliant ideas alone were never enough. Every presenter faced difficult questions about budgets, scalability, operations, and leadership. Rather than feeling discouraged, Malcolm filled page after page inside the leather notebook Harrison had given him, returning home each night, determined to learn whatever he did not yet understand. Week after week, he refined his business plan until every number reflected reality instead of wishful thinking. He calculated labor costs, maintenance schedules, equipment lifespans, transportation expenses, and customer service standards with the same care he once used to polish school hallways. Harrison introduced Malcolm to accountants, attorneys, and small business owners who challenged his assumptions while encouraging his discipline. None of them offered shortcuts. They offered knowledge, and Malcolm accepted every lesson with quiet gratitude. Nearly a year after receiving that simple business card, Malcolm submitted his resignation to the school principal. The older woman read the letter twice before looking up with proud eyes. She thanked him for every early morning, every repaired classroom, and every student whose day had been brighter because he had greeted them with kindness. Before Malcolm walked out for the final time, She handed him the same brass key that had opened the building for years. She smiled gently and told him to keep it as a reminder that honest work never limits a person's future. Malcolm slipped the key into his pocket beside Harrison's notebook, carrying both symbols into the next chapter of his life. His company began inside a rented warehouse barely large enough to hold 2 desks, a folding table, and several shelves filled with cleaning supplies. The first company truck was not new. Its white paint had faded beneath years of sunlight, and the engine complained every cold morning before finally starting. Malcolm drove it himself from client to client, meeting school administrators, church leaders, and small office managers who needed dependable maintenance services. Some politely declined. Others promised to call later and never did. A few offered him a chance, and Malcolm treated every contract as though it were the most important opportunity of his career. He remembered every employee's birthday, answered customer calls personally, and insisted that every worker wear a clean uniform with their name proudly displayed above the company logo. He believed the people performing the work deserved to be seen, respected, and appreciated because he understood exactly what it felt like to become invisible. Slowly, referrals replaced cold calls. One satisfied customer introduced another. Local schools recommended his company to neighboring districts. Medical offices appreciated the consistency of his team. Apartment communities signed long-term agreements after watching Malcolm solve problems before anyone needed to complain. The warehouse expanded into a larger facility. 1 truck became 3. 3 became 12. The folding table disappeared beneath conference rooms, computer screens, and detailed project maps. Yet every morning Malcolm still arrived before everyone else, brewed fresh coffee, straightened chairs after meetings, and greeted every employee by name as they entered the building. 2 years passed with surprising speed. The city began recognizing Brooks Facility Solutions as one of the fastest-growing maintenance companies in the region, though very few people knew the founder had once carried a mop through quiet school hallways before sunrise. Malcolm never corrected that omission. He believed the strongest success never needed to introduce itself because character always reached the room before reputation did. While Brooks Facility Solutions continued expanding across the city, life followed a very different path for Vanessa Brooks. The promotions she had once celebrated became harder to find as companies reorganized, departments merged, and ambitious professionals competed for fewer executive positions. The confidence that had once carried her through every networking event slowly gave way to quiet uncertainty. She still dressed with the same polished elegance and spoke with the same professional composure. But behind every confident smile was another unanswered application and another interview that ended with a courteous email thanking her for her time. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, while scrolling through dozens of new job listings at a neighborhood coffee shop, a familiar company name caught her attention. Brooks Facility Solutions was seeking a regional operations manager to oversee client relationships, strategic planning, and service expansion. The position offered an impressive salary, outstanding benefits, and opportunities for advancement throughout the growing organization. Vanessa opened the company website, expecting to find another large corporation managed by executives she had never heard of. The homepage displayed modern office buildings, dedicated employees, and testimonials from schools, hospitals, and businesses praising the company's professionalism and reliability. She noticed photographs of smiling maintenance teams, community service projects, and leadership seminars, but the founder's profile was surprisingly brief, mentioning only that the company had been built on the belief that every job deserved dignity and every employee deserved respect. No photograph appeared beside the biography. Vanessa paused for a moment as she reread that sentence. Something about it felt strangely familiar, though she could not explain why. She dismissed the thought and focused on the qualifications. Every requirement matched her experience almost perfectly. She updated her resume carefully, reviewed every sentence, and submitted the application before finishing her coffee. Days later, an invitation for a first interview arrived in her inbox. The recruitment process moved quickly. Human Resources praised her communication skills, industry knowledge, and leadership experience. A second interview followed with senior managers who spoke enthusiastically about the company's culture. They emphasized collaboration instead of competition and repeatedly mentioned that humility mattered just as much as talent. Vanessa found that unusual. Most successful corporations celebrated aggressive ambition. This one seemed to celebrate character. After the final interview concluded, she walked through the spacious headquarters, noticing employees greeting custodians, receptionists, and executives with the same warmth. No one hurried past the maintenance staff without acknowledging them. No one treated support workers as though they were invisible. The atmosphere felt different from any workplace she had experienced before. She could not quite identify why, but she found herself unexpectedly drawn to it. 3 days later, her phone rang shortly after breakfast. The human resources director offered her the position. Vanessa accepted immediately, relieved that months of uncertainty had finally ended. She thanked the recruiter, signed the employment agreement electronically, and marked her first day on the calendar with a quiet smile. As she closed her laptop, she looked once more at the company logo printed across the welcome packet. It represented stability, growth, and the fresh beginning she had been searching for. What she did not know was that every hallway she would soon walk through, every conference room she would enter, and every decision she would make had been shaped by a man she believed she had left behind forever. Fate had been remarkably patient, and without making a sound, it had already arranged the moment when two completely different versions of the same past would finally meet again. Monday morning arrived beneath a clear autumn sky as Vanessa Brooks pulled into the headquarters parking garage nearly 30 minutes before her scheduled orientation. The glass building reflected the early sunlight across polished windows, giving the entire campus an atmosphere of quiet confidence rather than unnecessary luxury. Employees walked toward the entrance carrying coffee cups, laptop bags, and notebooks, yet no one appeared rushed. Several paused to hold the front door open for others, exchanging friendly greetings regardless of job title. Vanessa noticed something unusual almost immediately. A maintenance technician pushing a supply cart received the same warm smile from a senior executive that a department manager received. The gesture lasted only a second, but it lingered in her thoughts as she stepped into the spacious lobby. Soft instrumental music played through hidden speakers, while fresh flowers decorated the reception area. Behind the welcome desk, the receptionist greeted every arriving employee by name whenever possible. Vanessa introduced herself and received a visitor badge, a welcome folder, and directions to the orientation room on the 5th floor. As the elevator doors closed, she glanced around at the people standing beside her. No one spoke loudly. No one tried to impress anyone else. There was an understated professionalism that felt remarkably different from the competitive offices she had known before. Orientation began with coffee, breakfast pastries, and introductions from several department leaders. They spoke about the company's growth, its expanding partnerships with schools, hospitals, universities, and commercial properties throughout the region. More importantly, they spoke about culture. One vice president explained that every employee represented the company equally, whether they managed financial reports or maintained the cleanliness of a client's building. Respect, he said, was not earned through titles, but demonstrated through everyday actions. Vanessa found herself remembering the sentence she had read on the company website about dignity. It seemed less like marketing language and more like an unwritten rule that everyone genuinely believed. After orientation, the new managers were given a guided tour of the headquarters. They passed bright conference rooms named after values. Instead of cities, including integrity, service, and excellence. They visited the operations center where large digital screens displayed project schedules and customer satisfaction scores rather than individual sales rankings. The guide proudly explained that teamwork mattered more than internal competition because every successful contract depended upon people trusting one another. As they continued through the building, Vanessa noticed framed photographs lining one hallway. The images captured volunteer events, scholarship presentations, employee appreciation dinners, and community projects completed over the past 2 years. Curiously, the company's founder never appeared standing at the center of any photograph. Sometimes a tall man in the background could be seen carrying boxes, serving meals, planting trees, or speaking with employees, but his face was always partially turned away or hidden among the crowd. The guide smiled when someone asked about the founder's absence from promotional materials. She explained that he preferred highlighting the people doing the work instead of himself. Vanessa thought that was unusual in an era when many executives carefully built public images around their personal success. The tour ended outside an elegant boardroom overlooking the city skyline. The guide checked her watch before smiling politely. "Our founder and chief executive officer always welcomes new leadership teams personally," she said. "He should be here in just a few minutes." Vanessa adjusted the sleeve of her blazer and gathered her notebook, expecting to meet another accomplished executive whose name meant little beyond corporate success. She had no reason to believe that the next sound she would hear, the quiet turn of a boardroom door handle, was about to connect 2 years of separate lives into a single unforgettable moment. The boardroom door opened without ceremony. There was no dramatic announcement, no assistant speaking into a microphone, and no carefully rehearsed introduction. A tall man in a charcoal gray suit stepped inside, carrying nothing except a slim leather portfolio and a cup of black coffee. His pace was unhurried, his posture relaxed, and his attention immediately shifted toward the people gathered around the table rather than toward himself. Several department leaders stood to greet him with genuine respect instead of practiced formality. One by one, they smiled and exchanged quiet greetings that sounded less like conversations with a powerful executive and more like conversations with someone they trusted. Vanessa glanced toward the doorway only for a moment before returning her eyes to the orientation folder in front of her. Then she looked again. Her fingers froze against the edge of the notebook. The room seemed to grow strangely still even though everyone else continued smiling naturally. Malcolm Brooks walked past her chair with the same calm expression she remembered from years earlier, except there was something unmistakably different about him. Confidence had replaced uncertainty, but not arrogance. His shoulders carried quiet purpose instead of quiet exhaustion. The man who had once pushed a cleaning cart through school hallways before sunrise now carried himself with the ease of someone who no longer needed to prove his worth to anyone. Malcolm greeted every new manager individually, shaking hands and asking each person their name before taking his seat at the head of the conference table. When he finally reached Vanessa, their eyes met for the first time in 2 years. Neither of them spoke immediately. There was no anger in Malcolm's expression, no satisfaction, and no surprise. It was simply a brief moment of recognition, followed by the same professional handshake he had offered everyone else. "Welcome to Brooks Facility Solutions," he said evenly. "We are glad you are here." Vanessa managed to return the handshake, though her thoughts seemed to scatter in every direction at once. She had imagined many possible futures after signing those divorce papers, but none had ever included this room, this company, or the man standing before her as its founder and chief executive officer. Malcolm took his seat and began speaking to the group with quiet confidence. He thanked them for choosing to join the organization and explained that every leader inside the company had one responsibility beyond meeting business goals. They were expected to make every employee feel seen, respected, and valued regardless of position. He spoke about janitors, receptionists, drivers, technicians, accountants, and executives with exactly the same level of appreciation. "Buildings do not succeed because of one office," he said. "They succeed because every person inside them believes their work matters." The moment someone feels invisible, the organization begins to lose something much more valuable than productivity. Vanessa lowered her eyes toward the polished conference table. Those words echoed through memories she had spent years trying to forget. She remembered standing outside Jefferson Heights Middle School beneath the morning sun. She remembered looking at Malcolm's work uniform instead of his character. She remembered believing that a person's future could be measured by the title printed on a name badge. Around the room, the other managers listened with admiration, taking notes as Malcolm described servant leadership, accountability, and integrity. None of them knew they were listening to a philosophy built from years spent cleaning classrooms before daylight. None of them realized the company existed because one man had refused to allow another person's opinion to define his future. When the meeting ended, employees gathered around Malcolm with questions about upcoming projects and expansion plans. Vanessa remained seated for several quiet seconds, watching the room slowly empty. She had entered the building expecting to begin the next chapter of her career. Instead, she had just walked into the living proof that the man she once underestimated had become everything she had failed to imagine. Ironically, the greatest shock did not come from discovering that Malcolm Brooks owned the company. It came from realizing how little he had changed. During the weeks that followed, Vanessa expected distance, resentment, or subtle reminders of the choices she had made 2 years earlier. None of them came. Every Monday morning, Malcolm greeted employees in the lobby with the same calm smile. He remembered birthdays without checking a calendar, congratulated technicians who earned customer praise, and personally welcomed every new hire regardless of department. Whenever he walked through the building, he stopped to speak with receptionists, security officers, maintenance crews, and interns with exactly the same attention he gave senior executives. Watching him from a distance became unexpectedly difficult for Vanessa because each ordinary moment quietly dismantled the story she had once believed about him. One afternoon, she joined several department managers on a visit to a newly signed school district contract. As they toured the facilities, a young custodian accidentally spilled a bucket of cleaning solution across one of the hallways moments before an important client walkthrough. The young employee froze with embarrassment, clearly expecting criticism. Before anyone else reacted, Malcolm calmly removed his suit jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and knelt beside the employee. Without hesitation, he helped gather paper towels, wiped the floor, and reassured the young man that accidents happen to everyone. The client watched the entire scene without saying a word. Later that afternoon, the superintendent privately told Malcolm that seeing the chief executive officer treat a custodian like a respected teammate had confirmed they had chosen the right company. Vanessa stood several feet away listening to the conversation, and something inside her quietly shifted. Years earlier, she had believed cleaning floors represented failure. Now she was watching one of the city's most respected business leaders perform the very same task without the slightest concern for appearances. Back at headquarters, curiosity finally overcame pride. During a break between meetings, Vanessa visited the small company history display near the executive offices. Unlike most corporate exhibits celebrating awards and profits, this one focused almost entirely on employees and community partnerships. Tucked inside a simple glass case rested an old brass key attached to a faded key ring. Beside it sat a worn leather notebook filled with handwritten business plans and financial calculations. A small plaque beneath them read, "Every dream begins with work that someone else may overlook. Never forget where integrity first opened the door." Vanessa recognized the brass key immediately. It looked almost identical to the one Malcolm had carried every morning at Jefferson Heights Middle School. Her eyes remained fixed on the display, while memories returned with remarkable clarity. She remembered the smell of fresh floor wax in those hallways. She remembered children greeting Malcolm by name while he smiled back with genuine warmth. Most painfully, she remembered the morning she had decided that his job defined his value. Standing silently before the display, she realized she had never actually doubted Malcolm's kindness, intelligence, or character. She had doubted the future she imagined those qualities could create. The mistake had never been believing he lacked potential. The mistake had been believing potential could only exist behind an impressive title. As she slowly walked back toward her office, employees passed one another exchanging greetings, offering help, and holding doors open without expecting recognition. Everywhere she looked, the culture reflected the man who had built it. The company was not successful because Malcolm had become wealthy. It had become successful because he had refused to abandon the values he carried long before success ever found him. For the first time since joining Brooks Facility Solutions, Vanessa understood that she was not working inside an ordinary corporation. She was walking through the visible proof of a life she had once underestimated, and every quiet act of dignity around her reminded her of the man she had failed to truly see. Several months passed, and Brooks Facility Solutions continued expanding into new cities while preserving the same values that had guided its first contract. The headquarters grew busier each week. New employees filled the hallways, and conference rooms rarely stayed empty for long. Yet despite the company's remarkable success, Malcolm Brooks remained the first person to arrive each morning. He still walked through the lobby before sunrise, greeting the overnight security team by name, asking the maintenance crew whether they had everything they needed, and quietly straightening chairs left out of place after late meetings. Wealth had changed his circumstances, but it had never changed his character. Vanessa Brooks noticed those details every single day. The longer she worked inside the company, the more she understood that Malcolm had never been waiting for an opportunity to prove her wrong. He had simply been building a life that reflected the person he had always been. One afternoon, After the quarterly leadership meeting had concluded, Vanessa remained behind while the other managers gathered their folders and left the room. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long reflections across the polished conference table. Malcolm organized a few documents before noticing that she had not moved. For a quiet moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Vanessa took a slow breath. "I owe you an apology," she said softly. "Not because of what you became, but because of what I failed to see before any of this existed." Malcolm looked at her with the same calm expression that had become familiar throughout the company. He did not interrupt. He simply listened. Vanessa lowered her eyes. "I believed your job defined your future. I thought ambition only looked one certain way. I measured success by titles, salaries, and appearances, and I never stopped to recognize the strength it took for you to show up every morning with dignity when the world barely noticed your work. I was wrong." The room fell silent again. Outside the windows, employees crossed the courtyard carrying notebooks and coffee cups, beginning another ordinary afternoon. Malcolm smiled gently, not with triumph, but with peace. "We all see life differently at different moments," he replied. "The important thing is whether we choose to grow after we recognize our mistakes." Vanessa nodded, grateful that his words carried neither bitterness nor judgment. She realized that forgiveness did not erase the past, but it allowed both people to stop living inside it. Malcolm closed his portfolio and walked toward the doorway before pausing. "You earned your position here because of your work," he said. "Keep doing your best. That is all anyone should ever ask." With that, he stepped into the hallway, greeting a young intern who looked nervous on her first day and introducing himself with the same kindness he had shown everyone else. Vanessa remained in the conference room for another minute, watching through the glass as employees smiled when Malcolm passed by. No one lowered their voices because the chief executive officer was approaching. They smiled because they genuinely respected him. At that moment, she understood that the greatest achievement in his life had never been building a successful company. It had been becoming the kind of leader whose success made other people feel valued instead of small. Years earlier, she had walked away from a man carrying a janitor's key ring because she believed his future had already been written. She now understood that character writes a far more powerful story than circumstance ever can. Malcolm never asked the world to regret underestimating him. He simply gave the world a better reason to remember his name. And as the evening sunlight illuminated the brass key displayed inside the company history case near the lobby, it quietly reminded everyone who passed that dignity never needed to shout. It simply kept showing up, doing honest work, until one day the entire world finally noticed.